You are listening to the Small Town Big Talk Show, the weekly podcast for small town people with big dreams and ideas. I'm your host, Rebecca Undum, and each week we'll cover a topic meant to inspire, encourage, and empower you to live big in your small town. Although it has its challenges, nothing beats small town living, and we're committed to sharing the best of what's working in the communities we serve. So enjoy this episode, and we hope it helps you to bloom where you've been planted. My guest on today's episode is Jessie Veeder. Jessie is an artist. She is a musician. She's a singer-songwriter, and she's also a writer. And she writes a weekly column for the Fargo Forum, which is North Dakota's largest publication. She joins me on the show today, and we really are just talking about basically, her and her life and how, as people in small towns, every single one of us has something to contribute, has interests, passions, and gifts and talents that we can nurture and cultivate to contribute in a meaningful way into our small towns. We talk a lot about the history of small towns. We talk a lot about the future of small towns. And you're going to love her as much as I did upon meeting her. So enjoy this chat with my new friend, Jessie Veeder. All right, Jessie, welcome to the Small Town Big Talk Show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to visit with you.
Oh my goodness. No, I think the pleasure, I'm pretty sure, is all mine and the listeners. So I'm really, really excited to have you here. So let's talk a little bit about, the kind of topically, we're talking about basically using your gifts, right? Using your gifts to contribute in a meaningful way in the small town. So can you just kind of tell us a bit of your backstory, how you ended up where you're at, what you do, and then we'll just kind of take it from there.
Okay. Well, I'm talking to you right now from my house in Western North Dakota on my family's ranch. That's almost 110 years old. So I'm kind of sitting in a place of a little bit of a dream come true, which sometimes doesn't feel like it when you're in the middle of life, raising a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, like talking about gratitude, like trying to pull yourself back in because we're in the thick of it. But I grew up here on my family's ranch. My dad's side of the family, we're homesteaders out here. And I just grew up with a dad that loved this place. My mom is from Eastern North Dakota and moved out here, fell in love with this cowboy and kind of set herself in the middle of this place that was so foreign to her. And I just want to mention that because I talk a lot about my dad, who is economic development director in our community and also a cowboy and a musician. And so I've been very, very influenced by him in my story, but also looking at my mom, who really came into this place as a young woman and raising 3 daughters out here and then finding her place in a place that was so foreign to her. But I graduated in 2001 from Watford City High School. I had gone to a little country school, and I was told in 2001 our town was dying, like a lot of North Dakota towns were at the time. I had a boyfriend that I had known since I was just, a little kid. And we were just told to get out of here. There's, we want you back, but it's not realistic. There's not a place for you. And I grew up singing. I had my first album when I was 16, an original album I did. I had been touring all over the state with my dad, who kind of got back into music when I got into music. And so I didn't know what that meant for me. I kind of left at 17, went to school at UND because it felt safe, but also like I wondered if I should be going to Nashville or LA because everyone said you needed to be gone, right?
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah.
And just ask one quick question? Because first of all, already I love the trajectory of where I know this is going, but the idea that you were told, and you said everyone, I'm wondering specifically what your parents were saying to you at that time. Makes perfect sense to me that everyone else in the community is like, oh, honey, we love you so much that we want you to stay away so you can be successful.
That was definitely.
It terrifies me that that's what we're telling our youth. I'm a little worried that that's still the message we're giving our youth and something I'm actively saying like, well, what if we said, go away and then go away, get your education? Because I live in a town where you can't get your college education unless you did an online program, right? Which that's a whole thing that really wasn't as hot when you graduated.
Oh, that didn't exist.
Right? Wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing. So I would love to know what your parents, what they were saying to you at that time as well.
Well, they're educated people and really open-minded. And I think the worry, and I see it still, they grew up in a different time, especially in a different economy. And so they wanted you to live your biggest, best life. And they struggled. My dad struggled. He came back to the family ranch and tried his hardest to work his butt off and get it out of debt. he wanted us to love this place, and he definitely showed us how to. But they wanted us, they are college educated. They thought that's the way to go. My dad actually was an advisor. He worked at UND in his younger days, in the beginning of his career. So he was all about like helping you find your career path and your passions, and he directing you in that direction, those ways. And my mom too. But it wasn't that I felt like if I came back home, I was a failure from my parents. It was just that they were struggling at the time to build this community. They didn't know if there was a place for us to grow and thrive as young people. So realistically, I know it was hard for them when we left. All the kids left. My little sister's 5 years younger than me. And he said to us, my mom too, but like, we have this ranch in this place that has been like his mission and his goal and his soul. What if they don't come back? What if I'm here and I have this place and I'm alone? And that was a big fear. And I wrote a lot about that in my music. Like, I have a song that I wrote when I was 17 called Heroes Proved, talking about all of these lights going off in our rural communities one by one, because when I graduated, some of these older generations of people were moving to town. They were dying. Their kids weren't coming back to take over the place. There wasn't so much hope there. And that was terrifying to me. And that was something even at a young age I didn't want to believe. But I guess I kind of went out into the world with one kind of my chin back and over my shoulder, thinking like, how can we make this work? So.
Okay, so much to talk about. And I don't want to like perseverate on this part, but I think the coolest thing about this story, Jessie, is that you're a tad bit younger than me, but not like crazy younger. Like, we're kind of same generation, right?
Sure, yeah.
Where the technology and the options that's present for people now, it looks completely different. And yet I really believe in my heart that I don't know. I would love to get your take on this, because I think you had the idea that you walked away at the time with your head looking back with a longing. Is that a fair
absolutely.
word? Like, just a longing and a yearning to be able to come back. Two things. I don't know if, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is do you think that deep longing and thirst for the return exists still today with our youth? And secondly, you figured out a way to make a path forward for yourself. And now, do you think that as in small communities, I love that your dad was an economic development guy. That's so cool. Do you think as small towns, we're doing a good enough job of helping these youthful kids, these young kids in our high schools and whatever, understand that this technology opens up a world that didn't exist for us? So it's two questions. I'm just wondering like your take on that.
So the longing, if the longing still exists with our youth, I think, this is such an individual story, but in rural America and with the people that I grew up with in the time that I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, when I was a teenager, it all depended on the relationship, had with your family, I think, and the connection that you found on a place. But talking to, and being involved in helping and getting your hands in things and coming along as a kid, and now that I am a parent, that's what develops that sense of place. And it totally did for me, because I wasn't sitting in the house and we couldn't. Okay, so technology, like, we didn't have a internet until my little sister was older. I didn't grow up with internet. I grew up with a call waiting was our big technology, right?
Yeah, wasn't it awesome?
Yeah. And it has changed so much so fast, even like, going into college. But in order to answer that question about how that longing that I developed, I can only speak for me personally, but I've seen it in my friends too, and my husband. We were raised in a time with families that brought us along. I went feeding cows. I went along on, chasing cows. I went along to sell the cattle. I kind of got to see, of course, from a kid's perspective, why someone might love this place, and just really had a connection to the landscape and the connection to the people that were on the place. I loved them. I found them valuable. And I was told never to be ashamed of where I came from. I went to school across the state in the bigger town with a little clip of sage in a little jar, so that I could smell that and look at that and think about where it was where I was raised and where I belong and my roots. So fast forwarding into a time now where I'm in my community in Western North Dakota, working as a working musician, a columnist, a writer, a mom, an entrepreneur, a rancher, those are all the things on my list that I had that I wanted or I thought I could be when I was 12 years old. Right. And that's helped me have a lot of perspective there, right? And I'm looking back on that. So for our kids now in this community that has grown by like tenfold, 1,200 people when I was growing up in Watford City, now closer to 8,000 to 10,000 people in the last 8 years.
Right. So let's real quick give the caveat to that, because we do have people that listen to this that aren't from North Dakota.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, likely most people kind of understand what that dynamic is, but there might be people that don't. So in case people are like, how do we do that? That's not something that necessarily happened by intention, right? So do you want to just quick clue everybody in as to what caused that
and
growth?
I think it's important to have that background because we have these conversations about our youth right now, and it's very important, and I'm glad you asked the question, for them to make that connection. Right. So let's see. So 8 years ago, I think it was 2020. So let's say 10 years ago, I moved back to my family's ranch because of the huge economic boom happening in Western North Dakota, the development of the Bakken oil formation and the development of the fracking technology made it so that all the oil that we had under the surface of this land, 10,000 feet, that had been mined before previously, but not very economically, not very quickly, could be extracted. And it was during a depressed economy, so we had people from all over the world come to our community seemingly overnight.
You know, a lot of people, like I'm the only person from North Dakota that a lot of people, not a lot of people know, but like if I go to a conference or whatever, you know, that's kind of how it goes. And we're relatively untouched by it where I live because I'm southeast North Dakota, right?
Oh yeah, you're as far away as you can get.
Right. And stay in North Dakota, we are about as far away. And yet, like, we get that there's impacts on us. It impacted us. But I can't imagine. I honestly cannot imagine, because we have 1,800 people, close to 2,000 people in Oaks. If our population were to explode like that, and you've got different cultures, you know, all of those things that you didn't deal with at all. Right. I can't even imagine the shock that was for your community to absorb.
It was a shock, but I feel like in some way, and maybe I could see it from a different perspective because I was watching my dad's work and the community's work as a kid. We were setting ourselves up, you know, on Main Street, being open-minded to some of the businesses, trying to reach out as technology advanced to get some of this work here. It was almost like we were kind of waiting for a shot in the middle of nowhere, if that makes sense. But you cannot be prepared for this. Like there's no other textbook that you can read that could prepare you for this. So what Watford City did, though, is not, in the leadership in that community is so strong, and it was at the time too. Don't say like, we didn't say, nope, not going to do it. Because that is how our town existed in the first place, you know, with this immigration, with these people that came to start a new life, you know, back in the 1900s. So having that perspective of being from immigrant families, we're not that far removed from it. I'm fourth generation, you know, so there's a little bit of that perspective from people that, you know, from locals. And then we just got together and said, well, what do we need? How can we keep these people here? That's where we're at. Right. So it wasn't like, you know, of course there's some of that, the growing
legit
infrastructure. I mean, I could go on and on. It could be a whole nother podcast, honestly, about every single thing that we had to sit down and build, but taking a little bit of advantage of, not taking for granted the opportunity there, but reinvesting it back in, and not just into the infrastructure, but into these quality of life initiatives that if you're coming from Missouri or Arkansas, you could maybe see yourself, even though it's 40 below in January, living here and loving it and having a family. And that's where, when I came in and moved back home, I really got involved with the strategic plan of this community that totally changed overnight. Like, I didn't know where things were anymore, where you could keep a handle on, my dad could keep a handle on like new businesses coming in, because maybe it would be one every 5 years. It was like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 a day. And all of a sudden you need more help. You need more human resources. But I really got involved in trying to help mold the situation and think about what we could do in terms of quality of life to get the people that are coming through that want to make a new life for themselves. And from an artist perspective, those stories were just incredible to me. Okay. I'm like, these people, what did they have to go through to say, like, to bring my family up here and live in a camper in the middle of winter gives us a better chance, and we're going to suffer through it, and we're going to find hope, and we're going to get this job and hopefully see a future here or send money back home. Like, there's so many stories there, and I just was fascinated by it. And that, going back to your youth question, those are the kids coming in here 8-10 years later. They have that story attached to them. So we're still thinking about those kids, how they can see this place as their home, as their opportunity and their future. And so we're building programs like vocational training programs that help them be prepared for the industry that is in our community, so that they maybe can stay here and come back and make a living.
Right. So, yeah. This conversation it's a little difficult for some of us, because we won't have that.
No.
Most of our small towns are not going to have that happen to us. We need to all just kind of own that, right?
Let's
like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not, there'd be no reason for that to happen. But I think putting those kind of challenges and opportunities even aside, coming back to the things that you said about connection to place.
Yeah.
I have never felt more strongly about anything in my life, actually, that if we want to make this place, any place, right? Your small community, you want to make it a place that your youth want to return to.
Yes.
We have to intentionally foster that connection. It doesn't just happen as easily as it used to because of technology.
There's so much distraction.
We're so pulled in a million directions, and we're constantly told that whatever is out there could be other people's stuff, other communities, other places is better.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%.
I mean, we're marketed to, we're sold to, we're advertised to, and our kids are soaking all of that up. And so it is on us to say, how do we, and I love everything you said, like, you get them involved in helping, they work alongside. That's important to me. Thinking about, how do I help these kids understand that this is how stuff happens in a small town?
Right.
Like, this is how we get things done. We farm, but even farming changes a lot, and farming is changing a lot, where I think some of that deep connection and love for the land is, I don't want to say that it's lessening, but I think in some respects it kind of is.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
I think because farming is more technology based than it ever used to be. You're not, think about, you get out to fix stuff, but you're not out digging in, like, you're not digging in the dirt with your hands. Like, so I think that is something that we all need to just be cognizant of. And I care deeply about that, because I do think that the kids that have that connection. So then again, that second part of the question is just look at the opportunity now.
Right.
And that clearly, let's pivot into that, because I think clearly technology is one of the reasons you are able to live such a rich and diverse and multi-passionate existence in Watford City. So what does that look like? I mean, how did you get into all of that?
Sure.
Because it's amazing.
100% these kids, and trying to give them the tools or the perspective that you want them to have to, like, even consider coming back. You also have to give them a little bit of wings and a little bit of push, because I don't think to leave maybe too. I want to really throw that out there and be clear about that. I don't know that I would have had, if I would have stayed in Watford City and stayed at the ranch. Now, this is just me personally, because of the career that I pursued and what I wanted to do. I don't know that I would have had the same appreciation if I didn't go out and get a broader perspective.
Thank you for saying that, because I definitely feel the same way.
Sure.
And I think also what's cool about it is, if you leave for a period of years, you do get different perspectives that you then get to come back and influence and shape your community in a positive, in a positive way. And I think that's a huge, like, seriously, you and I, we could literally create a podcast series about all these topics.
I can't wait to work on that project.
Yeah, we totally will. I'm sure you have plenty of time. It sounds like it. Like, you got lots of free time. But I think the idea that sometimes, and I know when I came back too, we've been back, it'll be 12 years now this summer.
Okay, yeah.
So we've been back, and I think when I came back, I was like, I know things.
Yes, okay.
Like, I know things, guys, and let's do this, and let's try this. And it needs to be more gradual, and we need to come back and, like, relearn what the community looks like now.
Yeah, it's like, put your arrogance aside.
Yes.
That was, I love, because I was going to mention that, and I'm so glad you said that. I remember having, this moment where I came back. I was still pursuing music. I was touring. It was, because we came back and left and came back again, whatever. I mean, it was a short period of time. We were in our 20s. We got married really young. Anyway, And I was upset because of a comment that someone said to me. I was helping in a new restaurant that was built and just getting my footing and then touring. And someone said, "Oh, you went to 4 years of school and now you're a waitress, huh?" And I was like crushed because you're like so insulted. And I remember talking to my parents about it, and I had ideas of how we were going to exist there, but was so uncertain and so underconfident in so many ways, because like I wasn't doing the thing that everyone, or I thought everyone did. Now I know that's not the truth, but go to college, get a real job, stay in that real job for the rest of your life, and that's success. Okay. So my dad said to me something like, nobody really cares what you did, when you left. They just care about what you're doing now and how you're helping the community now. So you can tell them all of the things, and that's great, and they'll be happy for you. But it doesn't matter unless you're putting boots to the ground and getting your hands dirty in it and proving to them that you are going to do that work here. And so I took that and said, yeah, I mean, that's so true. And somewhere it shifted for me when I moved back home then, wondering what this community could do for me. Like, I can't work in the bank. I'll be fired in 5 minutes. I don't have a teaching degree. Like all of those things that were lined up for me that I knew as vocations for myself when I was growing up. You're talking about technology. Suddenly I could live in the middle of nowhere and have access to the rest of the world. And then suddenly it, watching my community shift and change in front of my eyes, it's like, oh, it's not what my community can do for me anymore. It's why I'm here and what I can do for my community. And that really just opened it all up for me. That's the perspective I live by now. Of course, I'm pursuing my music and telling the story, but it's all these stories and related back to helping one another so that we don't feel that we're alone here. And it just totally shot in a different direction and blown way out of proportion, but in different proportion when I became a mother. That idea of community, that you really need one another. And now, so what I did when I got home, I lived in my grandma's little house that she raised 3 kids in, and countless foster kids and family members where my dad was raised. We moved back. My husband got a job in the oil and gas industry because that, made the most financial sense when the rest of the world was sort of in this economic crisis. We had the jobs here at our home, which, like you said, that doesn't always happen or doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. Yeah,
it doesn't happen. So we were very, we had to come from Missoula, and they, all of a sudden I was working in fundraising for the University of Montana Foundation because I thought, well, this is going to be my job now. I had been traveling and singing and writing, and then it was like, let me try this real job while my husband finishes college. Was good. I got a lot of education on how those nonprofits work, and looking back on it now, it's really serving me well. But we decided, to move back to the ranch, have Chad. He worked as a rig hand, and he was on the top of those tall derricks, and I would just visualize him like just dangling there in a storm, and then I would be out touring on the road singing for my supper. But I started writing about it, and we had internet connection all of a sudden, and I started a blog. I went to a writing workshop actually with North Dakota Tourism, and they were talking about how I thought maybe I would try to pursue something as a writer, but also maybe do another album and just try to be creative as I figured it out. And that's where I kind of center myself, is when I can create, I can get back to who it is that I am. And my husband said, I got this. Why don't you just, because I was worried about getting a job right away. And he said, why don't you just do the things on this ranch that you loved to do when you were a kid? You got 3 months. I've got this, figure it out. And so I just did it, and I wrote about it, and I put it out into the world because suddenly before, when I was singing for my supper and driving literally hundreds and hundreds of miles for one show at a coffee shop or a college for maybe sometimes 100 people, sometimes 10 people, that's how I could get my word out about my music. Now with the advancement in technology, I could connect to the internet. I could write my story about trying to figure out how to can choke cherry jelly in my grandma's kitchen and being a total failure at it and wishing she was there, put that out into the world and get instant feedback from people in Australia, from people in Alabama. They connected to that story of rural living or the nostalgia of it. And I've been talking about it and writing about it in my music since I was a kid. But then I was like, oh, I may be onto something. Like this story, that's my story, is other people's story. And it sort of just took off from there. Getting the column with the Fargo Forum, being statewide columnist weekly, and then being able to write more music and travel across the country, singing and speaking and, telling that story, but trying to be really honest every day about that it's not so, it's beautiful, but it ain't glamorous most of the time.
I always say, it's not sexy.
Well, look at me.
You do not look as bad as you think you do, by the way. Our audience can't see you, so you're good, but
I'm pretty.
You're really beating yourself up, and you do not look as bad as you think you do. Okay, so I said this before we hit record, that I feel like there's a kindredness between us. You just hit on a few things. I'm going to circle back to them. As you can see, I make notes, right? I write things down that kind of strike me. The idea that somebody actually said to you, oh, so you went to school for 4 years and now you're a waitress. In the keynote, in one of my keynote messages, I share a moment. I had a very similar moment. Where I had just come back. I came back for a pumpkin patch, believe that or not. My mom started a pumpkin patch and she needed help.
Awesome.
And, talk about like, what are you guys actually doing? I mean, just like, I literally took a complete departure from anything that I ever thought I was going to do, because I didn't have the longing to come back. That's the truth. I didn't, but I had done all the things that I thought I was supposed to do, was checking the boxes, and I got my degree. I was in banking. So it's also hilarious that you said that. And it's like, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. That's a bit of advice for everybody, right? And you might be good at lots of things, but that doesn't mean that's what you should give your life over to. So that's where I was. And I was in like my mid-20s, and I felt like, I can't do this for the rest of my life. What am I going to be and what am I going to do? And so, we came back. I had that exact same moment where I just felt like, I felt a lot of shame. Like, is this all there's going to be for me? Like, how am I ever going to feel like myself again? Because I had been a professional with air quotes around it. And that was what success looked like to me. You said that as well, right? And that's, I think, for a lot of us. And it's not, because part of it too is, like you said, putting your ego aside. That's where this whole thing started, right? It isn't, first of all, nobody really cares. Like, I love that your dad just said that to you, like, hey, kid, get over yourself. Nobody cares. But we think that they care. Yeah. And what we need to remember is that they actually do really care, but they care about our happiness. Yes. They care about our fulfillment. These people love us. Whether it feels that way in the moment or not, it feels like a jab and it feels like an insult, but really they're saying, like, gosh, from the outside looking at your life, everything looked great. And that is that's the self-reflection, I think, and the development that every person on the planet has to do, because we are the only person that can define what that success actually looks like for ourselves. And it may not look like what other people think or expect, right? So that was one thing that you said that I thought was just, I was like, oh my gosh, like that totally happened to me. Now then, the second thing that I think, again, super instructive for every single person listening to this episode, your husband's advice to, why don't you just dig deep and do the things that lit you up as a kid and kind of like see what happens. Now, I will say, with, again, a lot of love, not everyone gets the opportunity to do that. I understand this, but it still comes back to, what are the small ways then? If you have a full-time job and you carry the insurance, or you have, whatever the situation is, we have things that, and those are our innate gifts, right? And they come to us in pieces, and they come to us when we're young, and those things are still there to be cultivated and nurtured. So it's all of what you're saying. I love it so much. It basically, it doesn't validate, but it affirms and basically aligns with my whole viewpoint about people, that our gift to the community, the way that we contribute, is to step into actually who we are and continue to find ways to use those gifts and those interests and those talents to make something new in the community or create something different. And that's, you're living your life. You are absolutely living your big life in your small town. And it's just so cool. It is so cool.
Thank you. Well, I just want to be clear, a couple things. And you just articulate this so well. And I feel like sometimes I'm just like, I get impassioned about things, and here I am. But to kind of go back around to how we cultivate our youth and try to get them to see their future in someplace other than Denver and Minneapolis. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we also need like great minds here. Two things.
We do. We need great minds.
Isn't it a shame that we both felt shame?
Yes.
Back in our hometown.
Yes.
What in the world is that? And we knew, like, logically, so many professional people that had big lives there, good lives there, that helped us evolve, that took care of us, that we admired. Yet somehow we were told not to be like them. What's that about? That's not something we need to do for our kids.
That's like my eternal question, right? It's like, why do we do that? And I'm hoping that through these conversations, we can inspire people to challenge themselves to ask, why do we do that?
Yeah. Why do we do that?
Like you just said, the thing that we're doing is we're pouring into these youth. Mm-hmm. We love them and we cheer for them and we encourage them. We support them and we give them resources and we give them every opportunity they can to step into who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And then we don't say, and we love you so much that if and when you're ever ready, we'll help you, that your place can be here.
Be back here.
All we gotta do is start saying it. It's not like every kid's gonna come back, and that's obvious.
Not every kid should come back. And that was something I kind of learned from my dad's work in economic development. I remember one time he was trying to recruit some businesses and maybe some families here in the slow time, which is more what economic development people are doing across the Midwest, is trying to build their communities by finding the right people to live here. And he said, we have to be honest with the people that we're trying to recruit that this is not a life for everybody. And it ain't easy to live in North Dakota, you guys. It's freezing. It's a long winter. There's mud and there's just things that are very primitive still about it. But if you're up for it, it can be the place. But being honest with the people and your youth about what that looks like, but then going back to just like showing them that, you're happy here, there's the opportunity here. But what I found too as a musician, and I guess I just want to make sure I say this, because I talked about this with my friend. Sometimes when I was growing up with the passion for the arts, and I was driving all over as a teenager, maybe I remembered like trying to balance high school rodeo, which I was not very good at. I'm not a competitive person, but loved horses, so was in that realm. In theater, maybe that I wanted to be involved in, and then my own singing jobs, because I started working as a professional musician in some capacity when I was a teenager, like 15 years old. Sometimes wishing I didn't have that gift and that desire to be so creative or to sing or to perform, because I thought, boy, wouldn't it just be easier? Because I don't see anyone like me doing what I'm doing here. And I don't see any moms singing. I don't see, everyone's telling me if I want to do this, I have to go someplace else and I will only be valued there. Like they loved me and they were proud of me, but I felt like they would be even more proud of me if I was in Nashville. But I didn't want to go to Nashville. I maybe wanted to visit Nashville, but I didn't want to live there. And so it's evolved now where, the work that I'm doing in Watford City, when I came back, started helping with the strategic plan, really thinking about how I could use my passions to infuse them into a community that maybe didn't have a lot of arts access, right? So I worked with a board of mine and friends of mine who had the same vision, and we've developed an arts foundation in Watford City that's really new within the last 3 years of being a nonprofit. I've stepped into the director position, and with the idea that, and I feel this so deeply, North Dakota needs artists. We need to give them a home. Minnesota needs artists. Small town Oaks needs artists. They need musicians. Why do we send them away when they can tell our stories here and we can lift them up and we can lift our kids up and they can tell their stories and they can find, beauty in the place that they live and they can paint it and they can sing about it. But realistically then, as I'm just going to the art side of things, and I think it might apply to businesses and cultivating, like you said, a place for people, then we need to support it. We need to say, hey, if you want to sing at my wedding, I'm going to pay you, right? If you want to be the band at our street dance, you're valuable. Here's money that we raise to pay you. Here's an art show that we've created so that our artists can show and sell their work. I didn't see that happening in my little town, although we loved the music and we loved the arts in some capacity. We weren't making a space for them. So I wanted to make a space for them. And so that's really the work that I'm doing now, beyond just, my writing and my singing and the things that I've always done on the ranch too, is trying to see what I can do for Watford City and Western North Dakota in that capacity, so that a kid like me growing up in Watford City and who wants to be a singer could see another singer or see like maybe they could, and it's changed a lot because you have YouTube now and you can be a singer and live in the middle of nowhere and have a career, but we can give them resources. We can host open mic nights. We can have an audience there for them. We can bring in and raise money for a concert series that brings in, like we did last week, world-renowned countertenor, and it can come to Watford City. And then maybe, someone can see themselves living there. So anyway.
Everything you're saying is so, it just, to me, again, like it's striking every chord. And I have goosebumps. And yes, it's cold in North Dakota, but I'm not cold right now. It literally comes back to, well, there's several things. Like you said, showing people the possibilities so that if they have that orientation towards the arts or towards whatever the thing is, that they feel like they belong. Belonging is what creates community, I think, and people need to see 100%. That this is something that, and again, you talked about earlier, it's quality of life. You also said that economic development looks different now, which I feel like it's a drum I've been beating, that it is not about necessarily creating new jobs, even though that's important. But it is about thinking about people, thinking about why would people want to live here, and then doing all that we can to create mechanisms for people to plug into our community. And I don't think it's about how do we get all of you to want to be here. It's more about how do we give everybody that is here, how do we help them fall back in love with the community that they're in. Like we've got 1,800 people that live here. Do they all love living here? I don't know. I'm guessing maybe not. Right? We all complain like nobody gets involved and it's the same 10 people and we have all these complaints. And it's like, well, what are we doing to encourage people? And it is because it's not by telling them like, come and you're going to do this, this, and this. It's saying, this is something we want to create. Is that something that would be of interest to you? And then letting them come and find their way through it. Right. And the arts, I'm super passionate about it. I sing, but not like in it. I do sing at some weddings, that kind of thing, but I'm not an artist in that sense. But when I think about the work that I care about, it is like challenging the way that we think about things. And it's about the development of people. So that's my whole thing right now. I've also started a nonprofit. So you and I, you're definitely going to come back on the show. At least I hope so. And hopefully we can travel to one another. That should be manageable at some point, right?
Yeah. Oh, I drive by there. I'm traveling all the time. So we'll just swing in. Yeah.
Please do. Please swing in. But you talked about infusing your passions into your community. That to me is what creates hope. Yeah. You had said earlier that there was a lack of hope for your future in Watford City. And there's no reason for any community at this point to have a complete lack of hope if they have the will and they've got people that really want to make it home. And there are communities that are dying. We can't deny that. But I think the ones that are still thriving, we need to really dig deep and say, okay, how do we keep this momentum going? Because without concerted effort, it's not going to just continue to go. And it's because of the distractions. Other big cities are selling themselves like crazy to our youth. And we know that some kids should move to those communities. Absolutely. It takes all kinds. But this conversation, I just think it's so important. It's so important.
It is important.
You are raising your own children now. I've got 3 of my own children, and I can tell them all day long that they could live here, but I have to show them that. I have to show them. They learn from me by watching me.
Oh, 100%.
They don't listen to me.
Unfortunately, yeah.
They really don't listen to me at all.
They swear like me. But
Right, I know. So that's the whole thing is, it's like now in the work that I'm pursuing, the work that you're pursuing, we need to bring them along with us. And we need to bring other kids along with us and say, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And if you want something, oh my gosh, I think about millennials a lot, and then the Gen Z, I don't even know what they're calling themselves, whatever the youngest people that are soon going to be graduating from college and, again, or high school and looking for a place to live in the world. These kids care about the earth and they care about social causes, and they care more than any other generation before them. Small towns are a perfect place.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I was just going to say the same thing.
For kids that have, the way that you can shift and shape and influence your community positively, the change is that we're small. It doesn't take as much time.
Right.
Yes, mindsets sometimes are a little entrenched and that can be a barrier, but it's not insurmountable.
Right.
It's not.
It can make a big difference. And even as there's so many things that you just said that I just want to build on. The same 10 people is even in a community that has grown. If you don't think your town can relate to Watford City, I'm telling you, there's still the same small town mentality. And I guess it's the perspective of what a small town is too. Is it 1,200 people? Some people would say, 10,000 people is still a small town.
Right.
To us, we have stoplights and Taco John. So like, oh my gosh.
You're huge.
We're huge. Yeah. But the same 10 people mentality still happens. And this is something I work on and I try to work on every day with our arts organization. And it kind of goes along. It's not like everyone was on board and was like, I said, we're going to have this, this arts foundation. And then everyone came to every show and every, thing that we ever did. And it's not for everybody, but it's for some people. And those people didn't have it before. And so when we would do something like have a concert or an art show and maybe it didn't reap the results that we wanted, we didn't say, well, we're not doing it anymore. We worked on trying to tell our story and build our story and bring people along so that it became their idea. We're still working on it. But that's something that I learned from my dad's leadership is you can stand up there and tell people that we should do this and give them all the numbers and all the results and all the research. But if they don't think, if it's not their idea, if they can't get on board, and I'm not saying to manipulate, but like tell that story, right. Bring them along, give them the opportunities. And I'm just using it from the Arts Foundation perspective of what I'm learning every day is I want these things to live on beyond me. So every day I am thinking about how that, I don't want Long X Arts to be Jessie Veeder. I want it to be Watford cities and Mackenzie counties. And so if tomorrow, I ride off into the sunset, the people that have supported it and benefited from it, including the kids, including the people at our Good Shepherd home, our nursing home that have reaped the benefits of it, they can take it, see its vision, and it's theirs. It's not mine. It's not my idea. It's their idea.
That's what empowerment is, right?
Yeah,
and empowerment, it's ownership. And like this little phrase like goes way back, but people support a world they help create.
They help create, yeah.
So we got to give
come to our
right.
farmers market, and they're like, oh yeah, we really liked having a music there, and so I just was in from the perspective of just like showing them, and if their reaction is positive, then we know that's what they want. But it's funny to see, we had this countertenor on last week. He came in from. He has these credentials. He's saying at Carnegie Hall. We had a man who raised his kids, grew up here in Western North Dakota his whole life, had never heard anything like that, but had an open mind to come. And he shook Terry Barber's hand and had tears in his eyes. He said first, well, that was interesting, which I love a Western
totally
compliment. And I was
well, we're not going to cheer,
right?
I mean, for heaven's sake,
And then there was some section he found in one of the pieces, and it moved him to tears.
That's amazing.
And I don't care if no one else liked it. That made it worth it for me. So there's some perspective there. So.
Right. Well, and something you had said earlier, I didn't write it down, and then it came back to me as we were continuing to talk, is that we will pay for the things we value. And the fact that you are also trying to kind of shape that culture a little bit in terms of paying artists, so important. I can even say as a speaker, how many times I've been asked to speak for free when it is my profession. And the only way to combat that is to acknowledge it, right? And to
Absolutely.
Say if we value this, and again, I think too, artists sometimes feel this weird conflict about being paid for their work. I don't know why that is. It frustrates the tar out of me. What do you mean? Not everybody has the gift you have. So there's value in it, right?
I was laughing because, we're just going down this arts path now, but I think it speaks to the point of the value of the things that you can contribute to your community, because it's the gamut, right? But I was at the North Dakota Council on the Arts convening, and there was a room full of artists, and we're all getting together, and we all had some sort of job within the arts in terms of promoting it or maybe being artists ourselves. Well, I didn't know everyone in the room was an artist themselves. And so, but when they were introducing themselves, they said, well, I'm a librarian, I'm an admin assistant, I run this program. And then the director had to be like, and you're an artist, and you're a musician. Nobody led with that, and hardly any artist in that room, and everyone had talent beyond, said they were an artist.
Right.
And I was like, oh, and I kind of do that myself because I wear different hats, but also trying to explain to people that being a musician and a writer, and then, running this arts organization and working in economic development, they're like, whoa, you're all over the place. And I'm like, no. It all makes sense to me in the ranching thing too, because we're telling that story. We're telling the story of our community.
Yeah.
And when I say we, I guess it's me and my family and the team that I have in economic development and tourism. But we're telling the story of this community in all of the aspects. Like, I don't ever go out to, the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering and pretend I don't exist in Western North Dakota. I'm part of that story and part of that educating people about what's going on out here and our lifestyle, what we do on a ranch. That's a whole nother podcast, but that's a story we need to be telling as rural Americans. Absolutely. And how we, what we sacrifice, what we do, what it actually looks like and mean to be a rancher.
Right. Farming as well. Farming. So we don't ranch, we don't have livestock, sure. But the whole thing is I love that your focus also is on storytelling, because the truth is, if we don't tell our story, someone else is going to tell it, and it's not going to be an accurate portrayal of what's happening.
You learn that. I learn that now more, in our rural existence and our farming and ranching. But right away in the Bakken in Western North Dakota, I worked so hard to tell these people's stories. And I just want to mention this because it might happen in your community, not just because you're a boomtown, but because people have preconceived notions about what it's like in the middle of Nebraska. And I'm telling you, I drove up and down the Midwest in my 20s touring, and I've seen a lot of middle America. And it's a beautiful, some of it is just storybook and some of it is tough. But each community has their own story to tell. We were bombarded with this complete just drama of the situation of an economic boom, and the newspapers were reporting the numbers and the crime and the traffic fatalities and the long line at the post office. None of that was not that that wasn't happening, but I was like, wait, what about this family that moved here and started a soccer program, and they didn't, they lost their house in Nebraska, let's say, but they have a house here now and they have started over. What about these people that are genuinely good people that have found a place and found a way to help us build this community in a positive direction? There was more of those stories that I could see, and nobody was telling them. And so that was sort of my first step into, I can make a difference here by telling those stories. I wrote a song called Boomtown. I filmed a video for it right on Main Street and featured local people with their stories sort of in the mix. And I got a phone call from someone after I wrote that song. I had played it for a local news station, and it went out across the state. And I got a phone call from a man with a really thick Southern accent and on our landline because we didn't have good internet connection. And he said, I'm looking for the girl who wrote that song Boomtown. And I said, you're just in the middle of the afternoon. That's me, kind of forgetting that you put it out into the world because it was a brand new song. And he said, do you know me? I think you know me. And I said, I was very confused. And he said, well, I saw your song on the news. We played it back over and over. I feel like you wrote that song about me. And then he went on to describe pieces of himself that were in that song, how he came from Arkansas. His name was Donnie. I had a Donnie in the song. He just got married, all of these things that paralleled. And I said, Donnie, I don't know you. I wasn't writing the song about you particularly, but I was writing it about all these people that I see here. And he felt heard, and in a time in his life, probably in a new place that he didn't know if he was going to belong here, that maybe he was being judged. He felt like someone saw him, someone heard him, and that maybe he could exist here a little bit longer with his family. And if I didn't write another song in my life, I was glad I wrote Boomtown. And Crosby, North Dakota is where he was from, or where he landed. And I sang in Crosby a couple of years ago and told the Donnie story, of course, every time I sing Boomtown. Someone hollered from the back, oh, I know Donnie. He's still here. This would be 8 years later. He's working at the implement dealership. So he found his spot in Crosby, North Dakota, from a totally, completely different place. Anyway, point being, to your point, you have to share your experience or help other people share theirs so that, we just, in a changed world where we're not going over to coffee at each other's houses as much anymore. We can feel connected. We can feel like we have a community here. We can feel like someone can sit next to us and be like, yeah, I know it ain't easy. I know that this is happening. It's happening to me too. Or maybe I don't understand it, but I'm here for you and I want you here. So that's kind of been our big mission in Watford is that belonging, that inclusivity. We're all different colors, all different races now. That's not what we looked like lately, but it's probably what we looked like a little bit when we were immigrating over here and settling the place. And so history can repeat itself, and we need to remember where we came from and how you build community. It's by inclusivity, not they and them. And, now I'm in a town where my accent, have you noticed it? My North Dakota accent is foreign. And they ask me, where are you from? And I'm like, girl, I'm from here. This is what you're going to sound like if you stick around, So we're the minority, the people who grew up here, which is incredibly crazy. And I'm not mad about it,
Yeah. Honestly, though, as somebody that, again, like relatively unaffected by the oil boom, and all we heard was how the residents, the people that lived in these communities hate it, were afraid for their lives, didn't feel safe anymore. I mean, seriously, that was again, it's because it's sensational. So that's where we need to really take back the story and make sure that the simple things are still celebrated, because that's what small town living is. It's all simple, but those are through the course of your life, it's all of those little simple things that end up having huge impact, right? And it creates
100%.
So much meaning. Maybe it doesn't always make the best story,
right? But
more and more, I believe that there's a longing on everybody's hearts for some simplicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we can deliver that. It's the stuff that's happening every single day, up and down Main Street in a small town or on a ranch or wherever you're at.
Well, you just walk into two things. You walk into my mom. She owns a store on Main Street, Watford City. I worked at that store when I was in high school in a totally different time where we would maybe sell 2 things a day, and that was amazing. She owns it now in the coffee shop next door. So the community that she creates in those shops and the people that she meets, and she has a social work background in it, so it's perfect for her. She could write a book. I think those stories are more interesting than the story that we were sending. Of course, you have to be, it's truthful and you have to report what's happening. But the stories that they bring in from why they're here, what they're doing, how their community. Mm-hmm. But then when you're talking about creating community or creating inclusivity, and I plan a lot of events for our community, and I kind of hammer that, in this time especially. But when you think about Main Street, America, small town, what do you think about? I think about street dances or closing off the main street and everyone coming out, and or barbecues and picnics in the park, or the county fair. And so I'm just adamant about continuing that in whatever way we can. And I see it every event that I create. People are just longing to get out of their homes, especially after a long winter, and connect, physically connect with people. And so we do a huge festival. It's grown and grown, a Rib Fest festival that's free, shut down Main Street. It's went from just a quaint festival now to 5,000 to 7,000 people on the street to listen to a national act. I still can't believe we do that, but they look forward to that every year because that's a signature event in your community. And so I guess if you're looking for tips and ways to engage people and new people. And, sometimes that happens in these small towns where it's you have a new person and they feel ostracized, or they feel like they need to, prove themselves or belong somewhere. Creating these community events around the fact that you're just getting together, you're dancing, you're having a beer, you're having a hot dog, you're watching your kids run around like crazy people on the bouncy houses. It's not easy to do events, but it's simply that creates that signature hometown identity. And we have a few of them throughout the year. And I think about little towns, there's a lot of them that do that, and you can identify with that, and you're going to feel good when you're done. So I work real hard on doing some of those community events. And I believe they're not just fluff. I really think they make more of an impact than we realize.
Well, they are, this again is something I'm not a drum I'm beating. It makes it sound, I feel like I'm always on a soapbox of sorts.
Well, here I am.
I do feel like those events create quality of life connections that make economic development kind of the traditional thoughts about economic development possible? To me, when you think about job creation, our unemployment is so low. And I don't know if it maybe looks a little different in Watford City, but I'm guessing it's pretty.
We need all of you all to come and work here. We have jobs that need to be filled. But
so when you think about that, the main goal shouldn't really be anymore to create new jobs, but to create opportunities for people to connect, to create a quality of life that we actually scream about, like that people say, oh, Oaks, North Dakota, I love living there. Yeah. Because those are the things that are going to make people actually take a look here.
Yeah.
And I talk about it from like economic development. I talk all the time about entrepreneurship as a way forward for our community. Also, really paying attention to the fact that remote employment is only going to continue to rise.
Right.
You've got, these hubs or headquarters in major cities, and they have positions where people can work from anywhere. Why wouldn't we want to welcome those people here so they can get the best of all of it, right? You can have a job that you love and feels meaningful, provides for your family, but you get to experience.
And I think there's a shift a little bit in even my generation. I'm 36, where you go from your 20s and you're wanting this big wide world, and you want to just see where you fit into it, and maybe get the big corporate job, or depending upon who you are. But once you start a family, and this isn't true for everybody, but it's my experience and my friends, you want to be in a closer knit community. The idea that your children could walk to school is appealing. There's a lot, like my sister-in-law lives and works in Ray, North Dakota, which is still kind of in the boom of the Bakken, but hasn't had that, smaller town. So her kids can be on, the varsity teams, and they can walk to school, and they know people, and the community raises them essentially. And it also helps that she works in the school system. But boy, that sounds really nice to a family living in maybe the inner city inside of Minneapolis, that they could get out and breathe a little bit. And so I feel like there's a trend happening, even that you could know your local farmer and rancher. I was listening to hear snippets of people talk about that. And there's a little bit of a market. There's a market there that's coming down the line when you're speaking of agriculture, that we can start telling our story specifically through the food that we are providing to feed the world. They want to know that story, and we need to tell it. So you can live in a community where your local rancher and farmer, I think is more appealing than we even realize. And so, but how do they know about us? By people like you talking about it and telling that and being proud of it. And that's always been the thing, I guess, to come back full circle. When I went out into the world, not and up and down the Midwest, talking about where I was from, not, making light of like my funny accent, but not being ashamed of it, and maybe telling some funny stories about, what it's like to live in rural America or rural North Dakota. Nobody knows about us up here, but not being ashamed of it, not hiding that part of me, but making it part of my story. Because my parents said to me too, and I'll say it to my kids, we're really lucky to be living on this, 3,000 acre ranch that has stayed in the family for so long. We're an anomaly.
Right.
But not to take it for granted, because it was the work of our, relatives and the people that came before us that were here. And so how can we continue that legacy, make them proud, but also know that our story is unique? And then also, how do we share it? Because that was the family kind of, when you talk about, when I lost my grandma, Edith, who my first daughter is named after, when I was a young girl, but I knew her enough to know like who she was, to an extent that you can as a kid, but trying to learn more about the legacy of my grandparents. My dad and mom really have taken that and on into the next generation. But what kind of people were they? They built this community, they built the churches, and my great grandparents too. They brought people into their homes. They were proud of what they were doing, but humble. And we talk about this building and growing Watford City. Like, how do you keep those roots and that basis of, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get to work and do it yourself. If you can't don't rely on other people necessarily to do the work that you need to be done. And that, I think, is why Watford's thrived instead of crumbled in the wake of all of this economic boom, is that we didn't wait for someone else to do it for us, or the government support necessarily that can come down the line 10 years after you actually need it. We advocated, and we figured out how to allocate the monies that we needed, and reprogrammed, repositioned, worked with it as we went, and we're still doing it. But you kind of have to be innovative in your thinking. I mean, you really do.
You really do. Yeah. And that's, so that's another big thing for me is just the way forward. It's about creativity and innovation, both of those things. Innovation is not a word I don't think that we throw around a lot in small communities, right. But all that is just approaching your challenges, the challenges you've maybe always had with a different perspective, fresh set of eyes, and not closing yourself off to the options. That's hard.
Whoa, yeah, not saying we can't do it.
Or we've tried that before, right? There's a lot of that sometimes,
Oh, yeah.
Or like, it's not broke. Why would we try to fix it?
Right.
And it's like, no, but it doesn't have to be broken for there to be maybe potentially a better way or a different way to do the same thing. So yeah, there's so much about your story. You're definitely coming back, like for sure. I'm pointing my finger at you even, like you're coming back. So to wrap up this beautiful conversation, and first just thank you for your time and thank you for all you're doing to contribute to sharing the story of rural North Dakota. You do it beautifully. You do it out loud. You do it proudly. You do it well. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And my last question that I try to ask every single guest that comes on the show, and we've talked so much about it, but I would love to hear kind of your one-shot answer to what does living big in a small town mean to Jessie Veeder?
Well, we talked about it. It means finding your passion and your strengths and using them to make your community a better place to live. 100%.
Amen, sister. I've said it so many times that it isn't about specifically what you do. Harkening back to one more thing you said, it's like the idea that you're an artist and you're a writer and you have this arts council and you're in economic development. And to some people, they go, whoa, you're all over the place.
Thing. Yeah.
That's what living big means to me as well. It's like, no, the different things that you can bring, those are nuances that you can contribute. And every single person on the planet is uniquely configured with their own set of passions and talents and gifts. And so if we can tap into those and use those, that's what's going to also make the community rich and diverse and interesting and a place that people want to come be.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, if you create a community that people want to visit, it will become a community that people want to live in as well. So thinking 100%. About that is so cool. So thank you so much, Jessie, for your time and for everything you're doing. It's so awesome.
Thank you. This was a treat for me.
Oh, me too. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Small Town Big Talk Show. If you enjoyed today's show, we invite you to subscribe on Stitcher, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review. The more reviews we get, the easier it will be for other small town friends to find us. We encourage you to keep on living big in your small town because the size of your life is not determined by your zip code.